Good afternoon. It's a pleasure for me to be here, and I came a long way to talk to you, all the way from New Hampshire, where I live and where I work, which is the University of Massachusetts Lowell. It's exciting to be teamed up with this group, with the foundation that they've established with HCamp, the research they've been doing, and the ongoing work to identify things about football to help make it safer and manage concussion injuries, head injuries. I've been doing some research with Dr. Eric Swartz on the prevention side of head impacts and head injury. Dr. Swartz started a research project at the University of New Hampshire, which was called Helmetless Tackling Training. And we compared a behavioral modification and a progression with tackling training without helmets and shoulder pads. It was rugby style, American football influenced, to essentially develop those motor skills to get the head out of the business of tackling and blocking. So we did that study at University of New Hampshire. We also did a 2-year study that was funded by the Head Health Challenge. The 2-year study was at the high school level, where we implemented a very similar program that I'm gonna talk to you a little bit about. We found some positive results, some evidence to show that what we were doing was reducing the head impact frequency in those participants who were involved with the research intervention. So it's exciting to team up with this group and to do this study here. The funding is coming from the Gary Gallagher Foundation, and we're grateful for that. We have some also consultants from the University of Michigan and Children's Hospital, Children's Hospital of DC, the National Hospital for Children, a renowned neuropsychologist, which is also a consultant on this study. So the research study, and as you see in the handout, has really 3 branches, and one is to study the head impact frequency of football players. We're also going to use impact testing to track the neurocognitive changes in brain function over time. But we also want to look at the sort of the environment around football, the social cognitive environment with coaches and parents and players as well, just to understand the behavior behind tackling and blocking. So to talk a little bit about how this is going to take place, each participant will wear a Rydell Speed Flex helmet, which will have a head impact sensor on the inside of the helmet. This is called Insight, and we will capture data related to head impact frequency and intensity in practices and games over the course of 3 seasons. So it's a long-term study to be able to look at the influence of the intervention. And the intervention I mentioned is helmetless tackling training, and these will be a progressive set of drills that would take place during practice 3 to 4 times a week, with different phases, some being static and just in place, others being more dynamic, where the feet are moving, players have to make decisions where other players are moving in order to approach a tackle and get their body under control and get in the right position. And these drills will take place without a helmet and shoulder pads. So we want to see the type of influence that has on practice and gameplay when the helmet is being worn. Year 1 will be baseline. So we're just going to be gathering data. We'll be working with coaches to kind of develop the logistics and the rhythm of the intervention and how to implement that best. Year 2, all the players will undergo the intervention, the helmetless tackling training, and we'll be able to make some comparisons over time from year 1 to year 2 to year 3. And having a program like Pac-5 is a wonderful opportunity to make some comparisons with teams that are like Pac-5. Having St. Louis as a team is also a wonderful opportunity, the type of program that they have, and be able to make some comparisons with them as well. And in the second year, we hope to get a public school involved and then to be able to look at how this research will unfold with that group. So this is the early part of, this is informational. Eventually we'll be reaching out to you all for consent participation. So parents would consent to allowing your son to participate, and then your son would have to assent to participate in the study. So human research involving human subjects is voluntary. So, you know, if your son or you decide that you want to do this, and the program starts and the research starts, and at some point in time you want to opt out, you are free to do that. But the expectation is if while being in the study your son would wear this helmet brand and be susceptible, and we would track their head impacts with our sensors. How soon is the information available? Because this is a research study, we'll have a graduate assistant and some research assistants at practice and on the sidelines. And so it's observational in the sense that when an impact happens, data will be stored in that sensor and receiver, and the individual will have a base unit. The base unit will capture that information, which then will be stored eventually on in a safe and protected place. The data is essentially de-identified when it's being tracked and also being stored. So it really doesn't come into play in terms of immediate information. And if there is any sort of concern about a head impact, the athletic training staff and the medical staff are the first people that have the ability to make those decisions. And so this data really doesn't come into play with any sort of removal decisions from practice or games, or the return to play decisions where an athlete would, following a concussion or an injury, would go back to play. So at the high school level, when I did this study, over the 2 years, had similar questions from parents about wanting to know information about what was taking place with their child during practice and games. And I can say that during the study, nobody ever really approached us after the initial meeting. So it would be available under certain circumstances, but for the most part, at the end of the study, the information will be there. Their day-to-day operations don't change. They're on the front line making decisions about injuries and that sort of thing. So we're essentially behind the scenes, as it were. So helmetless tackling training, as I was indicating, and the handout sort of points out, is a progressive set of 10 drills. Some very basic stuff at the beginning, but some more functional and dynamic things, as players become more comfortable with the system. So, it's probably not unlike anything that you've, or very similar to some things that you might already be familiar with, like HuTT tackling per se. It's rugby influenced, so it's a lot of footwork. It's a lot of, lowering your center of gravity, being in a position to make contact. Much like a wrestling takedown, it's leverage, that leverage step, where to make contact with the shoulder, and then the strike zone or the midsection of a ball carrier, and then how to use that leverage and that difference in momentum to either leg drive the individual back or slow them down so others can then join the tackle, or a roll technique where you're gathering that momentum and you're bringing it to the ground. So a lot of the buzzwords and the coach speak may be similar. We'll try to be all on the same page in terms of the delivery of that. But for the most part, it's a set of 10 drills. The execution of those might take a little longer up front, just the instructional part, but much like the drills that I watched you guys do in the field today, once the players are familiar with that, it becomes very intuitive, instinctual. And that's the idea, to kind of ingrain that process so that when the equipment is on, players have confidence in their ability to make a tackle without getting their head in the way or leading with the head. So, and that's the objective that we're going to hopefully study over time. I'll tell you that there's in order to study this without the helmet and shoulder pads, there's a hypothesis or a theory. It's called the risk compensation theory. And so the helmet and shoulder pads or protective equipment is shown to have an influence in behavior. So a player feels more protected, or a bicyclist who's wearing a helmet feels more protective, a skier or a skateboarder, if you will, and so their behavior changes a little bit. They might take a little extra risk or two, and that's very similar with football. And so in order to really ingrain those motor behaviors and to sort of reduce provide that perception of risk. You're going to have a perception of risk without a helmet on if you're engaging in a tackle or a block. That's one of the foundations of why we came about this research project. Well, in the case, and this happened with the other studies, and certainly injuries happen. If it's a head injury, that's one thing, or any certain injury. If a research study participant can't participate, then we won't have the opportunity to gather any data on that individual. But nothing changes in terms of the research itself. If the participant then returns to participation, playing football that is, we'll just pick up where we left off in that case. And so because this is a 3-year study, we have the opportunity to kind of deal with the ebb and flow of what naturally happens in athletic participation. Injuries do happen. And unless the participant is out completely and doesn't return, that's one thing. So it'll just be a matter of redistributing the equipment in following years.